liberty dies by a million paper cuts, not by a thrust through the heart. And so it dies very slowly, and then it dies very suddenly. And the question is, are we at that nexus now where it's about to die very suddenly? That's what we're here, I think, to try to stave off.
Hey, Greg Staley here with Diverge Media, here with the Libertarian leader, Tim Moen. So what brings you out to Parliament Hill today, Tim?
Well, I heard about this event and I was invited to speak. I support the right to free speech. I support, any pushback against these government lockdowns and the growing encroachment of the state on our lives. If you give me a podium to speak in an event like this, I'll be there. So I'm grateful for the invite and I'm grateful for the opportunity to speak to this crowd.
Freedom is a principle of the Libertarian Party, very strongly held.
That's our primary goal, is liberty. We don't want to impose an agenda. We divide the world not between the left and the right, or even the globalists versus the nationalists. We divide it in between authoritarians and libertarians. And as long as libertarians just want to be left the hell alone, authoritarians want the government to impose their agenda or quell their fears or anxieties. We don't want any of that. We just want the government to leave us alone. I think we're with kindred spirits here. And so, my goal here is to talk about the growing threat that is government, and maybe suggest to people that what's needed is actually not more voting, but a cultural change. We need to create more libertarians, more people that reject government as the answer and embrace freedom and liberty.
Do you think one of the cultural things that needs to change is the accountability of our government? Like here today, we have Norm Traversy going to hand off corruption briefs to the U.S. Embassy to investigate our government here.
Right.
Do you believe that's something that needs to shift in Canadian culture? We need to have a strong desire and truly hold our government to account for their actions.
Yeah, well, the fundamental nature of government is that it's not held accountable, right? Like if we were to engage in central banking, we'd be thrown in jail, rightfully so, for counterfeiting money. If we were to tax our neighbor, we'd be thrown in jail for armed robbery. If we were to ban guns in our neighborhood, we would be charged and thrown in jail for uttering threats. So government is exempt from all these rules. They act like criminals, and there's no accountability for that. So definitely we need some accountability in government. And ultimately the problem is that government is very difficult to be held accountable. In the free market, if I don't like what Walmart's doing, I can go to Costco, or I can go to mom and pop shop, and I can punish them that way. And businesses that aren't virtuous go bankrupt. That's their incentive to be virtuous. Government doesn't have that. It has a monopoly on this. So we need to really chain down government and limit it. I would advocate for constitutional reform to do that, because it's so very difficult to hold it accountable. But I think there are things we can definitely do to hold government accountable. I think that your opinion needs to be backed up by personal responsibility. So if you're going to vote or impose something on the Canadian people, you also have to be willing to pay for that in some way and have skin in the game. And right now, politicians have no skin in the game. They can send our boys to war. They never have to serve on the front lines. They never have to pay for it. They impose that cost, both in terms of lives and money, on the Canadian people, and they're never held accountable. So that definitely needs to change.
Yeah, I want to get a quick comment as well. During the pandemic, our deficit was about $27 billion at the beginning, and now we're projected at the end of this fiscal year to be at $1 trillion. Do you think that's responsible spending out of the government of Canada?
No, obviously it's not. And beyond that $1 trillion, I didn't even actually know that number. That is mind-blowing.
That's the projection.
That's the projection. Well, we're already before this pandemic even started, we've accumulated over $4.1 trillion in unfunded liabilities. Those are commitments and debts that the government has made on our behalf that we're responsible for. And that adds up to nearly $250,000 per taxpayer.
Like retirement pension funds, things like that.
Exactly. Unfunded, healthcare, all sorts of different things. So these are commitments that they've made. We don't have the money for right now, but future taxpayers and citizens are going to have to pay for it. And we don't, most of that isn't even paid through taxes. A good chunk of that is actually paid through inflation, right? So that they rob our buying power, and we don't even notice it. The price of milk goes up $2 next year. That's not a big hit on us. We don't really notice. So we're kind of like frogs that everything's being heated up slowly. Eventually, it's going to be boiling and unsustainable and collapse. So liberty dies by a million paper cuts, not by a thrust through the heart. And so it dies very slowly, and then it dies very suddenly. And the question is, are we at that nexus now where it's about to die very suddenly? That's what we're here, I think, to try to stave off.
All right, so as leader of the Libertarian Party, is there a message, do you feel, that you would want to get out to the Canadian people today?
Well, the main message is to embrace liberty, right? And if you already embrace liberty, your primary goal, it's not enough to just go to the voting booth and vote for your principles or vote against your worst fears or anything like that. That's the minimum you have to do. What you have to do is create more libertarians, and that means you actually have to love love the sinner and hate the sin. Okay, so we can't call people libtards or snowflakes and expect to persuade them. To create libertarians, you need to persuade people, and to do that you need to connect with them, and to connect with them you need to have some level of respect and love for them as a person, and just recognize that they're possessed by a bad idea, they're possessed by an evil ideology, and you have to attack that ideology, and you do that with love and you do that with persuasion. So if you're a liberty activist, I would encourage you to really study up on the philosophy of liberty. I would encourage you to learn how to debate rationally, not emotionally, not engage in ad hominems like libtard and snowflake, and to really have genuine concern about the person you're trying to connect with. And if you're not capable of doing those things, support someone like myself or another liberty activist who is trying to do that, and you can really support the cause that way. And that's ultimately, unfortunately, it's a grind, it's a lot of work, there's no easy fix, I wish there was, but that's the work that's got to be done to save Canada.
Well, we thank you for taking the time to interview with us, Tim, and look forward to seeing the events unfold today with you. Thank
Awesome.
you.
Thanks.
Thanks,
Appreciate it,
Tim.
man.